The family in Poland lived in a very sheltered life. My father, Jan Adler, had a business, a tannery business in Warsaw, and my grandfather, Joseph Adler, had a tannery in Radom. My father, from time to time, was visiting in a technical capacity, since he was a tanning engineer with impact.
What does that mean? What does it mean, tanning?
Tanning engineer is tanning the skins.
Ah.
And he was
skins
a
for
chemical engineer
leather.
with an impact on tanning.
Tanning the leather, right?
Leather. Tanning the
not
leather,
not sun
no,
tanning.
no, the sun.
Leather, making leather.
Making leather, usable for all kinds of purposes. Among others, they were also making harnesses for the Polish artillery and cavalry horses. I went to the first grade in the same school as my brother, Szkoła Powszechna i Gimnazjum imienia Mikołaja Reja.
And where did you live?
We lived on Chorza Street in Warsaw. I had a nanny. Many in Warsaw were crazy about her, and my mother always got regards that they saw me in a car taking a ride with her in a car of this ambassador, that general, another general. So that's how it was. The standard of living was that my parents could afford a cook and a maid, a nanny for me.
And how big was the apartment?
The apartment, I think, was 4 rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
was there any religion or anything?
No, we did not observe any religion.
Did you ever go to synagogue?
No. My parents were both members of the non-religious league, anti-religious league.
So what made the family Jewish? Really, just the history.
My father was a Mason, so he was probably expressing himself in the Mason Lodge. My mother was, when they met, she worked for a bank. She graduated from, shall we say, the Polish equivalent of the London School of Economics. And she worked for a bank. Then when she met my father, they met in a bank, and he decided that she wouldn't work anymore.
And what did you have friends then? Did you have?
Yes, I had friends on my floor. Marek Tusk, same name as the present Prime Minister of Poland. And no, but they were Jewish, and his mother was Gustawa Jarecka. She was a communist, and she was a salon communist. She has written a book, People and Flags and Banners. And my mother spent a lot of time with her, sitting in cafes, and also with you met Risha, right?
Yes.
Yes, and also with the mother of Risha Pinkus.
So they had a good life.
They had a very good life.
And did you have friends in school?
Friends in school, no, because I was the only Jew in the class. Of course, there was no anti-Semitism, but when there was the Christian religion, we had the Jews from all the classes had a lesson in. We had a Jewish religion, and the Jewish religion was all taught in Polish.
Mm-hmm. So how did you know it all that you were Jewish? What made you aware that you were Jewish? Just the
Probably nothing.
nothing, but that being separated in the class.
Being separated in the class, no, because I was going with other Jewish kids from other from other classes. Were going for the lessons of the Jewish religion.
And how? So why did you not have any Polish friends?
I don't know why. Maybe in the building, I forgot. I only remember my brother's friend, Rachel Lindenbaum, and his friends was Jan Krantz, who is today a very famous composer in Poland. He was of the German, the school was of German Protestant persuasion. So those were Polonized Germans, mainly. Now they were Richard Lindenbaum, he was a Jew, and Marek Tusk. I don't remember too many friends.
So, in that time, you didn't feel any anti-Semitic
no
feelings.
No, nothing like that.
So when were the first signs of something wrong?
First time that something really happened was after we were evacuated. We evacuated ourselves to Warsaw, to Kovel, where my mother was born, and over there the Ukrainians started to scream at us Żydy, which means Jews.
Wait, but how did you get to leave the house and move to Kovel?
One bright sunny day, there was an evacuation order for specialists in military supplies, because the Poles, before the Russians attacked, before the 17th of September, the Poles wanted to...
This is 1939.
39. The Poles wanted to rebuild the army on the other end of the Bug, and they didn't know that Russians will attack, so my father was told to evacuate. And first he took part in the defense of Warsaw. Here are post-mortem his medals for 1939. And as an ARP, air right warden. And we and some neighbors and friends, they rented a truck, and we went with the truck as far as I believe it was, I don't know, I don't remember the city. That's as far as they had petrol. Then there was no petrol anymore left, so we started to go on peasants' horse-driven carts.
But before leaving, was what happened to all the things and to the apartment and to...
We just locked the door.
locked the door and left. But what?
My mother's sister, Basha, she got the keys.
And what happened to her?
Germans finished her off.
So what actually made was it a required evacuation, or it was a choice to go
It
there?
was required and somehow choice also.
So other members of the family stayed.
Hmm.
So and then what did you take? Do you remember what you took? Did you?
Yes, we took mainly my mother's jewelry, which she had plenty of.
And what did they tell you when you were just in school? You were just going to first grade or second grade, or?
First grade.
So what did they tell you, that you're going to go to a new school, to a new place? Or
No.
Just that we're moving?
No. That was I didn't the second grade in September of '39. I didn't because of the war. The school year didn't even start.
Oh, so this was just before the beginning of second grade. You were going to start second grade, and that's when you left?
Yes.
And then so you left the apartment and you took just suitcases and
That's it.
and a few things, and then you went into a truck that was
Yes.
and to go to Kovel.
Yes.
And what was the?
On the way to Kowel, of course, we have been bombarded. All the evacuees were bombarded by the Germans.
So before you left, were there already bombings in
Yes.
Warsaw? So when did the bombing start? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Okay, but you already it was already feeling like a war when you left.
No, the Germans from day one, from September 1st, they bombed Warsaw. And then, of course, they machine gunned the routes and all this to.
So on the way, you were caught in bombings and in
Bombings, yes.
And-
And strafing by machine guns. The German fighters went very low and they were strafing the columns of the refugees.
So who was driving the truck then? Do you know? I mean, was
Somebody that
from-
they hired.
they hired, and the family paid them to take.
Of course.
Yeah, okay.
Not only us, there were other families.
Others. And then what made them go to Kovel? Because there was family there.
The family was there, my mother's cousins.
That was Gutka and their
Gutka, right,
and who and
right, and her family, and Sovka's
Sofka's family, right?
Sovka's family.
Hmm. And so then what happened when you got? How did you get there? You said part of the way you got by the
Peasants' carts.
and then you had to switch to something.
No, we
you
were.
got
They
there.
brought us to
They
the
brought-
door
Oh, there.
of Guta's father.
And then you stayed with them.
We stayed with them.
How was there? Did they have a nice place?
Yeah,
did they have enough space?
they had a house.
They had enough
One
space for
family
four of you.
house. Pardon?
They had space for all four of you.
Yes.
So, and then did you go to school there, or did
No,
no?
my
Because
mother
it
wouldn't
was
let
still
me
war.
go to a Soviet school
Oh wait, so Kovel was in.
in the Soviet zone of occupation.
So it was taken over by the Russians, but it's
Right.
Poland still. So this was under the Russians.
Yes,
already.
it was under the Russians.
And then. So you didn't go to school then, and how long did you stay in Kovel?
We stayed till June of 1940.
June, so that's almost a year. Like the
Almost
whole
a
school
year, right? And then they came in the middle of the night, the KGB, and they said that the Polish landlords, they are taking us back to Warsaw. So in the middle of the night, my father said that we can go to Poland also in the middle of the day. So he says, it's always a good time to go home. Then they gave us, I think, 20 minutes to pack. And
So this is the Russians now.
this is the Russians. The KGB, they came with
So
the bayonets and all this.
but were they after you or also after the rest of the family?
Now the family, there was the Russians tried to push Soviet passports on a lot of people. They tried to push it on us too, but we did not agree. And some of the people in Kovel, Jews, Christians, of course, accepted the Soviet passports. And when we were there, we were visited by force. We were visited by all kinds of Russian officers. And one of them claimed that he is a doctor from Kiev. He was a Jew. His name was Rivkin. And he was telling us stories about the life in the Soviet Union, how good it is, how fantastic it is. Take the passports. Anyhow, nobody took the passports, but Guta's family, they took the passports. And while they were taking us, Guta's aunt said, you see that they have little children, give them some more time. He says, you know whom you are asking for to be more merciful? These are the enemies, these are the Polish landlords, the enemies of the Russian state. We were the enemies of the Russian
because
state.
they thought of you as Polish.
I don't know what they thought. They got an order to evacuate Polish landlords. So then they took
And
us.
so Gutka's family also had to get evacuated, or just you? You had to leave
We,
because they knew that you were from Poland.
yes,
Okay.
but you see, no, Guta's family took Soviet passports. Not just them, a lot of people in Kovel. They thought that it will be better.
And you didn't take the Soviet passport?
No.
So what did you do then?
We didn't take the Soviet passport. We registered. We thought that we will be able to go to the flesh pots of Warsaw to recover our belongings. But nothing of the kind happened.
Where did you go then?
We went straight east. And when we arrived at the railway station, there was my
East meaning in Poland or into Russia?
No, they took us to Russia.
Wait, so I thought they were going to send you back to Poland.
No, but they lied.
Oh, they said that they were sending you back to Poland, but they
Yeah.
took you where?
And they took us to Siberia. But my father had experience with the Soviet railway system. The rails are wider. Soviet railways are, the rails are wider than the Polish rails. So they put us on the wide rails, and my father said, we are going to Russia.
So he knew because
You
of
know, by the direction also that the train was directed east. So we went for 2 weeks. They put us in cattle cars, of course.
So this was not a fancy train with seats and.
No, this was not a fancy train, and
What did you do for 2 weeks in that train?
nothing.
But was it? Could you sit? Did you have to stand? What was?
No, we're sitting. Sofka's father, let him rest in peace, saved the life. He was a pediatrician. He saved the life of a child of the KGB commander. So he was at the station and he says, this is my family. And they have to travel better and they have 6 children. So the KGB man said, he owed my uncle a favor. So he said, first car will be isolation cars for the sick. This was us and another woman who was a nurse. They put her with us, so we had a whole car for us, and they rode on this isolation car.
Mm.
So we traveled in relative comfort.
And where did they give you food? Did they give you?
Yeah, they gave us some food on the stations, yes.
Mhm.
And
So 2 weeks you were in the train basically day and night, or stopping at station.
they were not nice. If they did let us out of the cars and all this. If somebody was late, they were shooting in the air. They were not beating us, but nice they were not.
Okay, but you didn't have a choice. You had to go with it. It wasn't. It wasn't a.
We were arrested.
You were basically going to what? What was the destination? They told you.
They didn't tell us
Oh, they
any
didn't tell you,
destination.
but you thought it was going
They
to be.
did not say a word.
Hmm. So you were just traveling on a train east, and you didn't know where for
We didn't
weeks.
know where.
And then what happened when you got? Where did you get to?
We got to Tomsk, which is in Novosibirsk area.
So this is already you crossed into Russia and into Siberia.
Siberia.
And now this is in June or in
This is in June, beginning of July.
1940.
40, right.
And so it's summer. So what was the weather there?
The weather over there was bearable.
Hmm.
And they took us on foot into the camp. The camp was surrounded by barbed wire with the watchtowers.
To a camp, and what was it like? It was a work camp? It was a
It was
prisoner
a work camp, of course. And they put us in common barracks. You know, one big platform to sleep, and the facilities were on the outside, and there was a place to take a shower. And then
Now, this whole time you basically never had a choice to go back to Poland or to go back to.
we were guarded.
You were guarded the whole time. So now you got to this camp,
And
to the
they-
Russian camp, and they.
And then they said that people with families, they will build like cages for us, so that we can have some privacy. But they didn't do it. We did it. I mean, the prisoners, under the supervision of the Russian carpenters, did the so-called rooms. Each room had an oven for cooking and for heating, and they're separated by wooden boards, so there was a little bit more privacy. And my father started to work in the management of the Gulag. You know what Gulag is, right?
Gulag is a camp.
Gulag is the Gulag is the management, the KGB management of all the camps.
So why did they take him for that?
Pardon?
Why did they take him for that?
Because he knew Russian.
So he knew Russian. Did your mother know Russian?
Of course, but she didn't admit.
So he knew Russian, so they took him to
They
work there.
put him in an administrative work. And then my father wanted to organize a barrack in which the Polish intelligentsia will be in. Not with the common people, you know, the Adlers with the nose in the air. So they put with us some doctors and put some Polish officers and etc., etc.
So this is this was still inside the camp. You just had
inside
slightly
the
better.
camp, right.
And did you get like meals there, or what was the food?
In the morning, there was a place where they cut the bread, the daily rations.
Mhm.
Your father was going every morning to stand on line there, and then he was bringing the bread, one loaf per family per day, and I was waking up from the smell of the bread, and I started to cry that I am the smallest one, so I'll get the smallest portion.
Mhm.
And then they gave us some products. There was a kitchen, a common kitchen, where the ladies were cooking.
The ladies, the prisoners.
The prisoners, right. So we were allowed to cook. People were allowed to dig potatoes in the summer, of course. Then everything was frozen in the winter. Dig potatoes and carrots. And there was also, what they call it, cabbage, the basic greens.
But not meat or anything? Or...
Yes, there was meat that they gave us coupons, and once a week, I think, that under guard, under escort, they were going to the bazaar in Asino, and over there, with the coupons, you could get milk, frozen milk,
Mhm.
and some meat.
Mm.
But the meat was also some kind of leftovers.
And you had to cook it? Or
Mm-hmm.
So how long were you in this?
How long
In
we
this
were in
situation?
there? We were there till, and my mother, of course, didn't let me go to the Soviet school. And we were there till August of 1941.
So one more year after you arrived?
Yes, because that's when the Polish government in exile signed the amnesty agreement
Yeah.
with the Soviet government that the prisoners will be released in order to form a Polish army.
So for this period, you and my father didn't go to school at all? For the two
Your
years?
father
that
went to the school.
You went? Why didn't you go?
Father.
You were too young? Or they didn't?
No, my mother didn't let me go to a Soviet school. You know that in our barrack there were enough Polish doctors to write all kinds of medical certificates for my mother, that she has a heart disease, for me, that I had such an asthma that I cannot go out.
So what did you do all day for 2 years?
I was lying in bed.
Hmm.
Because it was so cold. My mother watched me like a hawk.
What was the winter like?
The snow was up to the top part of the windows.
So you couldn't really go out?
But your father went to school, and my father went to work. And when they were walking to work, they were holding each other, the men, they were holding each other so that they wouldn't slide on the snow.
Did you have coats and?
Yes, whatever we brought with us, but the people who work, they got some winter clothing to go out.
Hmm.
And
So what? So this went on for the whole extra year, and then
they
41. What happened?
Then they released us, and they told us that we can go free. They gave us a traveling order.
They let you go free in the camp?
Yes. And everybody could get a traveling order to wherever he wanted.
And what was the reason? 1941, the war was still going on. Why did
The Germans have attacked Russia.
Because the Germans attacked Russia, they decided
They
that
became
they're not...
allies with the Poles and the Americans and the British. So Sikorski, the prime minister of the Polish government in exile, signed a pact with Molotov, who was the Soviet foreign minister, about the release. So we went into the what you call it? We went into Russia, south. Also in
So how did you just leave? You just took your things and left? And how did you do?
They gave us a
train or
certificate that we have been released from the camps.
So by now you were like in
Stateless.
third grade. You were like 10 years old or so, right? 9 or 10?
No, 1942, 32, 42, almost 10.
10, okay. And you haven't really gone to school since you were back in
No.
in Warsaw.
And then, of course, they say that I have a talent for languages, so I listened to the Russian. I could express myself a little bit. Then we went to Uzbekistan.
Wait, so how did you get to
With
their trains?
the cattle cars. They had echelons. They didn't have any railway communication. Wherever the train was going, they did let us go.
So you just got onto trains,
Yes.
and and just in the direction you wanted to go. You didn't
Yes.
even know where you were going. You didn't have anywhere to go. So in which direction?
Then we went south.
Who
because
decided
that's the
Were you
Polish-
trying to get back to Poland?
No, that's where the Polish army was forming.
So you were, but how did they decide where to go?
Well, no, the Russians told us where the Polish army is forming.
So your father wanted to join the Polish army?
Yes. They didn't accept him because of age. So
Wait, so he went to. So now you crossed over to Uzbekistan, from.
that's where the army was forming.
And then.
And there was already a Polish representation of the Polish government in
How did you
exile.
find them? You knew. How did you know where
Oh,
to?
everybody knew.
Everybody knew where it was.
No, there were plenty of Poles there that were released from the camps. And
So all the Poles that ended up in Russia were released. Then,
not all of them.
No.
There were some that there were some Poles that the Russians didn't let them go.
But they couldn't go back to Poland because
Because
the
German
Germans were there.
occupation. How could they cross the front line?
So they couldn't go there. And so you went. So the parents
Then
decided
we
to
went to Kermina, which is called the Valley of Death. That's where the 7th Division was forming. And your father, at the age of 14, joined our. And
so he lied about his age, or
one of my mother's previous admirers was the commander of the regiment. So the Russians were very much against the Jews joining the army. But he somehow smuggled your father in, and we started.
Why did he want to join the army?
Because only the army families, Jews, they said only the army families will be allowed to leave Russia. We knew that they would evacuate the army to Iran.
So the only reason they let you go was so that you could join the army. And then because they couldn't take your father, then my father, your brother, had to go
Yes,
to the army.
but the Russians were not thrilled to take the Jews. So then he was giving us part of his rations, bringing to us.
So he joined the army and he was close to you.
In the same, from here to Continental Avenue.
Okay, I don't know the avenues,
Very
but how many
close,
a few
very
blocks.
close, very
So
close.
he was in an army camp and you were living close to the army camp,
Yes.
and
In a
because you were
Uzbek hut, which we were lying in mud and wasn't very pleasant. Then one bright sunny day, they say that the army is being evacuated. They didn't know if the civilians are coming yet. So one day after the army, we were evacuated and we met already in Pahlavi with your father. We met on the Persian side, on the Iranian side.
wait, you were evacuated separately from him. He was
Yeah,
stayed
the
with the
army
army,
separately and the
and
civilians.
you got moved to Persia, to Iran. By what? By the Russians still, or by the Poles?
By
now?
the Poles.
The
They hired some ships, and everybody was lying on the deck, and that's how they evacuated us to the beach in Pahlavi. Of course, it was warm. It was the summer, so we just had a straw roof on 4 poles, and we were lying on the sand.
And on a beach in Iran.
Yes,
And what were you doing there? Just
nothing
for how long?
for a week or two.
Hmm.
Then they took us on trucks and they took us to Tehran. That was another camp. This camp was guarded by the Polish army.
But now you were family of Polish soldiers, so that
Yes,
was, so you
but-
were considered good people.
We were considered good people, but the army had some kind of agreement with the Persians that the Polish civilians will not run around Tehran. So in order to leave the camp, you are required to have a pass. So my mother got passes somehow. My father was very sick, they operated then in Tehran on his urinary bladder stones. And then...
And during this whole time, they took care of you, like they gave you food and that because it was part
They
of the
gave us
army,
food,
because
yes.
you were related to the army.
And everybody in the camp was getting food. From Polish Red Cross, Polish YMCA. We are not starving.
Hmm.
And then one bright sunny day, they decided that the army is going to Palestine. But the Jews, the Iraqi government didn't want the Jews to go through Iraq.
Because you were still in Iran.
We're still in Iran,
In
right?
Iran, but
So
you-
they decided to put us on a boat. If you know the geography, they took us from Iran to Karachi on the Persian Gulf.
Hmm.
They took us to Karachi, and we were for a few weeks in Karachi.
And this is still the Polish army. So why were you traveling? And where was
To join the soldiers
and the soldiers were moved to Palestine?
to Palestine. The Polish army as a whole moved to Palestine.
What do you mean as a whole?
The whole army that was evacuated from Russia,
Why did they go to Palestine?
because they could not arm them. For the army was destined to fight in Italy.
Hmm.
So they had to arm them and train them on British equipment, etc., etc. They only could do it in
So
Palestine.
this is the Allies. Basically, the British had to train the Polish army so that they could
Right.
fight against the Germans in
Right.
Poland, but they were training them in Palestine.
In Palestine, right. Palestine.
So by
Egypt later-
chance, so this was Palestine, obviously Israel, but this was
Right.
But it wasn't a plan to bring the Jews there. It was
No.
just a plan.
About the Jews, they separated the Persians, separated the Jews. The Christians went through Iraq.
Oh, because the Iraqis would let them through.
The Iraqis said the Jews you separate and you take them.
So in this camp there was not just Jews. In this camp were also everybody that went into the
Everybody,
Polish army.
yes, but the
So
Persians separated the Jews
In
on
order
the,
to
on the
pass
request
through.
of the Iraqis. So we went to, first we went to, the famous Tehran children traveled with us.
What is that?
The famous Tehran children. The orphanage. The Jewish orphanage, which the Jewish agency arranged with General Anders that he will take them out of Russia. So people with families like us were only maybe 400 people. The rest was the orphanage. We close to 1,000.
And
They were training on the boat. There were instructors from Israel, and the older boys and the older girls were learning Tasach on the boat in Hebrew. And of course, they didn't have rifles, so they had kapap. Then they couldn't continue it in Karachi. Then the other boat came and took us to the Suez Canal. And from the Suez Canal, they took us on the train, and we went through the Negev, and they took us to Atlit. Again, a camp.
so you got to Israel not with any intent to go to Israel, just because you were a family of the
Right.
Polish
With
army.
So, when we arrived, of course, the orphanage was taken over by the Jewish agency. But us, they said, you manage on your own. There were no badonim, there were no tzrifim. They said, you have your Polish government to take care of you. So they said,
So you were not really considered Israeli then.
They said, you want to go to the...
But they knew you were Jewish.
Of course. They put us in the basement of Meonot of Dimchet. You know where is Meonot
No.
of Dim? The end of, almost the Yarkon, the end of Ben Yehuda Street.
Ben Yehuda by Nordau,
Ben
by
Yehuda by
Nordau,
Nordau, right.
close to where
Where we used to
between Ben Yehuda and Hayalkon,
Right.
that area.
And they put us in a basement.
So,
And-
so this was already in Tel Aviv.
In Tel Aviv.
So how did you get from Atlit to Tel Aviv?
Right? They brought us to Tel Aviv. If you wanted to, they provided us with a bus.
But this was still under the Polish, or
No,
at this point
this is still the Jewish agency. And then they turned the back on us, and they said, you go, there is a Polish representation here and there, and you go to your Polacks, and the Polacks will take care of you. So, people went. Witek's father was also in the Polish army, etc., etc. So you remember Torazis.
Mhm.
So she went with my mother, etc., etc., with my father, and they said, we will send somebody to you and we will take care of you. The next day came a Polish officer and says, ladies and gentlemen, we will pay for your lodging in hotels in Tel Aviv. Come on, let's move. He brought with him the hotel owners. We didn't have too much, so they carried our. And we went to a hotel on Bograchov, Hotel Yosef.
where the opera house is now, and
yes,
the
and
beach.
then they were giving us. They gave us tickets for a Polish place where they had food, and like a eatery. And I went to Polish school.
So you were in Israel, but you were not speaking Hebrew, or you were not really.
I didn't speak Hebrew till 1945.
So at this point you were in Israel, but you were still studying in Polish, in a Polish school, that was run by the Polish army.
Yes, by the Polish embassy.
And did your father work then? Or?
Yes, he worked in the leather business, but he was not allowed to because we're getting support money from the Polish government. So he was not working legally, and that's how we stayed. In 45, I went to Tichoni Lemishar.
To what?
I went to a Hebrew school.
So then, but at some point you disconnected from the Polish army and just became Israelis.
Your father was already in England.
So at some point he transferred from the Polish army to the British army.
The Polish army in England, because Risha's father was a big shot he was a legal advisor to the Polish Navy. So he arranged for your father to be transferred to a school in Poland wearing Polish uniform. And then when they dissolved the Polish army, he joined the British army. And then I suppose that then and there he somehow got himself connected to the Medina Baderech, because otherwise why would he go and serve in Egypt, for whom it was necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Haganah needed it. So then he came once from England for live in Israel, and that's where I think they offered him to work for the survey in Israel, and short time later he came, and that's it.
So when did the Polish government stop being connected to you, to what you were?
Pardon?
They paid for you for your lodging for a while, and then they stopped.
They stopped, I think, around 45.
When the army dissolved.
When the army got dissolved and the British cut the funds.
And
but the agency never gave us a penny.
the Jewish agency, because you came through this other way.
They didn't say nothing. They simply ignored us.
And then slowly your parents found work and found the place to live. Was that always the place on Ben Yehuda? Or?
No, my father, when the austerity period started, my father worked for the Merkaz HaOrot, which was the center of distributing the ready products, the skins, to the
leather
shoe manufacturers. And my father didn't speak Hebrew, of course, so they gave him a translator from Polish. He had his own interpreter.
He learned a little Hebrew later.
Very little.
Some.
So that's more or less the story in a nutshell.
Yeah. And what happened to the other parts of the family? Which ones survived? Which ones didn't?
Okay, then Still during the war, Sofka, who somehow transferred herself to Romania, arrived in 1944, I believe. And Guta somehow survived with the Russians, you know, that she suffered a lot from the KGB. She had to report. She lived with her aunt, with Tonya.
Because her family was killed in front of her.
Yes, her family was killed. And the KGB, I don't know what I heard, that they were putting out the cigarettes on her and all this, burning her. She was told to undress every day and all this. And then one bright sunny day she went to France. Who else? Krisha, my mother's niece, survived on Christian papers. I saw her when I was in Warsaw. She looked very frightened. She later died. Who else?
The family in Kovel, was there anybody else?
They all were killed.
And from the ones, everybody that stayed in Warsaw?
In Warsaw, those that were evacuated, those that were in Russia, Lolek, you remember Lolek Srebrenik? Lolek went back because he joined the Communist Party. He had some big job, then he came to Israel. He was reading the news on the Israeli radio in Polish because he had a very good voice. Then my father's cousin, Lutek Persky, was in the film industry before the war. He became the director of the Polish documentary film industry. And what's his face? Stanisław Adler, which was also my father's cousin. He was a big shot in the film industry. He made a lot of movies with Wajda. You know who is Wajda? The chief Polish.
Andrzej Wajda?
Andrzej Wajda, yes.
He made a lot of films.
He made a lot of films with Wajda. One bright. And that's the rest of the family.
And did you ever go back to where did you go back to Poland?
Yes,
after?
I was on 82. I was invited to a convention of the interpreters. And they wined me and dined me. I went together with Frida. And we had the time of our lives during the martial law. They treated us like soft eggs. I didn't pay a penny.
Did they know about your past?
Of course.
Did you get to visit any?
Yeah, I was allowed to see Krisha.
But did you visit your an old neighborhood or your old school?
Not allowed to.
Why?
That's what they say. We can't let you see that. They know my past. They said, we don't want you to see that. Where all the time we had a nanny, a KGB man.
With you.
With us. He wouldn't let us. He spoke fantastic English to speak to Frida as if he would have been educated in the States or in England. But no touch, no such. Krisha was allowed to see me. She came to the hotel. But I knew that the room was bugged. So when she came, she showed us like this. I said, I know.
But that wouldn't be the case today, right? I mean, today.
No, today, no.
Today it's.
Today it wouldn't be the case. Today you can do whatever you want.
Mhm.
So, how did you like the family history?
Okay.